Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive from Peaceful Rooster Experience.
Happy New Year to you too.
Today, we're going to be diving into a quote
Mm,
from Friedrich Nietzsche.
yeah,
And, he's always good for thought-provoking stuff.
he is.
Um,
Yeah.
and this one really kind of struck me.
hmm
He said, "It is inhuman not to hate when you're being abused."
Wow.
Yeah, and I have to admit, this one seems to go against
Right.
everything we're usually told about, like forgiveness and turn the other cheek and all that.
Yeah, it is. It is a provocative statement, isn't it?
It is.
And it really challenges us to examine our assumptions about hate.
Right.
What's interesting is that Nietzsche isn't simply condoning hate.
Oh, okay.
He's actually linking it to our very humanity.
Okay.
He seems to be suggesting that the capacity to hate, particularly in the face of abuse, is somehow essential to who we are.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit.
Sure.
What do you think Nietzsche means by connecting hate to our humanity?
Well, to understand that, we need to consider Nietzsche's broader philosophy,
Okay.
particularly his concept of the will to power.
Mm.
This isn't about power in the traditional sense of dominating others.
Okay.
It's more about a fundamental life force,
Mm-hmm.
an instinct for self-preservation
Right.
and growth.
Yeah.
And within that framework, hate can be seen as a manifestation of that will,
Okay.
a refusal to be subjugated
Mm.
or diminished by abuse.
So instead of seeing hate as purely negative,
Exactly.
Nietzsche is suggesting it can be a force for asserting oneself, for protecting one's boundaries.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
When someone is being abused, their sense of self, their very being, is under attack.
Hmm.
Hate, in this context, can be seen as a primal defense mechanism,
Oh.
a way of pushing back against that violation.
Okay.
It's the no that rises up from the depths of our being,
Mm.
a refusal to be annihilated.
That's a powerful image.
It is.
So it's not about seeking revenge or inflicting harm on the abuser.
Yeah.
It's more about reclaiming your own power,
Yeah,
your own sense of self in the face of that abuse.
precisely. Nietzsche believed that abuse, by its very nature, seeks to dehumanize the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It tries to strip them of their agency,
Right.
their dignity, their worth.
Yeah.
And hate, in its raw form, can be a visceral rejection of that dehumanization.
Oh, okay.
It's a way of saying, I will not be reduced to this. I will not be broken.
Mm-hmm.
I am still here.
That's a really profound way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And it brings us to this idea of reclaiming your humanity,
Yes,
which I think is central to understanding Nietzsche's point.
absolutely. Allowing yourself to feel hate in the face of abuse can be an act of defiance, a way of reclaiming your right to exist,
Mhm.
to feel
Yeah.
to be fully human.
Yeah.
It's a rejection of the abuser's attempt to define you,
Cool.
to control you,
Right.
to diminish you.
So rather than seeing hate as something to be suppressed or eradicated, right? Nietzsche is suggesting that it has a role to play in our psychological and even spiritual survival.
Yes.
Wow.
And I think that's where his quote becomes particularly challenging.
Okay.
We're often taught to associate hate
Right.
with negativity,
Yeah.
with violence,
Yeah.
with something that needs to be overcome.
Right.
But Nietzsche's asking us to consider a different perspective,
Okay.
one where hate, in its raw and unfiltered form,
Hmm.
can actually be a catalyst for growth and self-preservation.
It's definitely a challenging concept to wrap our heads around.
It is.
And I'm sure some of our listeners might be wondering,
Right.
okay, but isn't suppressing hate a good thing?
Sure.
Doesn't it lead to forgiveness and peace?
That's a valid question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to another crucial aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy, the dangers of suppressing our emotions.
Okay.
He believed that denying or burying these intense feelings,
Yeah.
even those we label as negative, could have detrimental consequences.
So what happens when we try to bottle up that hate?
Well,
Yeah.
pretend it's not there.
Mhm.
According to Nietzsche, repressing these powerful emotions doesn't make them disappear.
Right.
It simply drives them underground where they
Mhm.
can fester
Right.
and potentially manifest in unhealthy ways.
So instead of disappearing,
Right.
that suppressed hate could actually turn inwards,
Exactly.
leading to self-blame, self-hatred, even self-destruction.
And it can also create a breeding ground for resentment,
Wow.
bitterness, and cynicism.
Yeah.
Instead of confronting the source of the pain,
Mhm.
instead of allowing ourselves to feel the full force of our emotions,
Right.
we end up poisoning ourselves from the inside out.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about how societal pressure to be the bigger person or to forgive and forget could actually be doing more harm than good in certain situations.
It's a complex issue, of course, and I think Nietzsche would caution against simplistic interpretations of his ideas. He wasn't advocating for hate as a solution to all problems,
Okay.
but he was urging us to acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience,
Right.
to confront the shadows within ourselves as well as in the world around us.
So instead of simply condemning hate as inherently bad,
Yes.
Nietzsche is asking us to consider its potential role in our psychological and even spiritual development.
Precisely.
Okay.
He's challenging us to see hate not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a powerful force that, when understood and channeled appropriately,
Okay.
can contribute to our growth and self-preservation.
This is really fascinating stuff.
It is.
But I can already imagine some listeners feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's a lot to process.
It is,
Yeah.
and that's why we're taking this deep dive together.
Right.
What I want to emphasize is that Nietzsche wasn't giving us a step-by-step guide on how to handle abuse.
Okay.
He was inviting us to engage in a deeper philosophical exploration of human nature, of the complexities of good and evil, and of the often uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
And within that exploration,
Exactly.
he's reminding us that it's okay to feel the full range of human emotions.
Yes.
Even the ones that we might be tempted to label as bad or wrong.
It's about recognizing that we are complex beings,
Right.
capable of both darkness and light, and that sometimes
Yeah.
the path to healing, to growth,
Right.
to reclaiming our humanity
Yeah.
involves confronting the shadows within ourselves
Okay.
and in the world around us.
This has been an incredible start to our deep dive into Nietzsche's quote.
It has.
We've unpacked some really complex ideas about hate, humanity, and the will to power,
We have.
but we've only just scratched the surface.
We have.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore, especially in terms of how this concept of hate as self-preservation might play out in real-life situations.
Okay.
And that's exactly what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Nietzsche's provocative statement on hate and abuse. Before we delve into real-life applications,
Okay.
I think it's important to clarify that Nietzsche wasn't advocating for hate as like a universal solution
Right.
or a path to moral superiority.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
His philosophy can be easily misinterpreted,
Right.
especially when dealing with such a charged emotion as hate.
For sure. Yeah, I can see how people might get the wrong idea.
Exactly. Nietzsche was primarily concerned with individual self-realization, with each person becoming their most authentic self. And he argued that this process often involves confronting uncomfortable truths,
Okay.
both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So how does this idea of hate as self-preservation
Yeah.
fit into that broader framework of self-realization?
Well, for Nietzsche, personal growth often arises from overcoming challenges, from pushing back against forces that seek to limit or define us.
Yeah.
And in the context of abuse, hate can be that force of resistance, the
Right.
inner strength that allows us to say, I will not be defined by this experience.
Why will not be a victim?
So it's not about wallowing in hatred or seeking revenge.
Well,
It's about harnessing that energy,
Exactly.
that anger,
Yes.
and using it as fuel for personal transformation.
precisely. It's about reclaiming your agency, your power to choose how you respond to the abuse.
Okay.
And that can manifest in many ways.
Right.
Setting boundaries,
Yeah.
leaving a toxic situation, seeking therapy,
Okay.
or even channeling that anger into creative expression or activism.
It seems like this concept could be particularly relevant for people who have been subjected to systemic oppression,
Right.
where the abuse is not just, personal,
Exactly.
but ingrained in societal structures.
That's a really insightful observation.
Thanks.
Think about the historical examples of marginalized groups fighting for their rights.
Okay.
The civil rights movement, the fight for women's suffrage, the struggle against apartheid.
Right.
In many of these cases, righteous anger, a collective sense of outrage at the injustice.
Was a powerful motivator for change.
So it's not about condoning hatred towards individuals,
Right.
but recognizing that anger at injustice,
Yes.
at the systems that perpetuate abuse, can be a catalyst for social progress.
Exactly. And this is where Nietzsche's concept of master morality versus slave morality comes into play.
Okay.
He argued that slave morality is characterized by resentment, by a focus on the perceived wrongs done to them,
Right.
while master morality is about self-affirmation,
Okay.
about creating your own values and living by them.
So in the context of abuse, could we say that allowing yourself to feel that hate, that anger,
Yeah.
could be a step towards transitioning from a slave morality of feeling powerless
Right.
to a master morality of reclaiming your agency?
That's a very interesting interpretation, and I think it has merit.
Yeah.
It's about moving from a position of being defined by the abuse
Right.
to a position of defining yourself, of choosing how you want to live and who you want to be.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, it is.
But it also brings up another question.
Okay.
If hate can be this catalyst for growth, this force for self-preservation,
Yeah.
are there any dangers associated with it?
Of course. As with any powerful emotion, hate can be destructive if it's not channeled constructively.
Right.
It can lead to bitterness, resentment, and even violence if it becomes all-consuming.
So it's about finding that balance,
Exactly.
acknowledging the validity of the anger,
Right.
but also finding healthy ways to express it,
Yeah.
to process it, to prevent it from taking over.
Exactly. Nietzsche himself was wary of becoming enslaved by any single emotion, even one as seemingly justified as hate.
Okay.
He believed in the importance of self-mastery, of cultivating a critical distance from our own emotions so that we can make conscious choices about how we respond to them.
That makes sense. It's about being aware of the hate,
Yeah.
allowing yourself to feel it, but not letting it dictate your actions or define your identity.
Precisely. It's about harnessing the energy of hate without becoming consumed by it.
Yeah.
And that requires a certain level of self-awareness,
Right.
of introspection, of being willing to confront the darker aspects of ourselves without judgment.
That's a really challenging but important message.
It is.
And I think it speaks to the complexity of Nietzsche's philosophy.
Right.
He wasn't offering easy answers or simplistic solutions.
Right.
He was inviting us to engage in a lifelong process of self-discovery, of questioning our assumptions, and of constantly striving to become our most authentic selves.
And that journey, as Nietzsche reminds us, often involves confronting uncomfortable truths, embracing the full spectrum of human experience, and finding ways to integrate even our darkest emotions into a life-affirming philosophy.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring Nietzsche's thought-provoking assertion that it is inhuman not to hate when you are being abused. We've talked about how this statement challenges conventional wisdom about hate and forgiveness,
Yeah.
and how Nietzsche connects hate to our very humanity,
Right.
particularly in the context of abuse.
And as we wrap up our deep dive, I'd like to touch upon a question that often arises when discussing Nietzsche's philosophy.
Okay.
What happens after the hate?
Yeah.
What comes next in this journey of self-realization and overcoming abuse?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We've talked about hate as this initial force of resistance, a way of reclaiming your power and asserting your boundaries.
Right.
But is hate the end goal?
Certainly not. For Nietzsche, self-realization was an ongoing process, a constant striving for growth and self-overcoming. He believed that clinging to any single emotion, even one as seemingly justified as hate,
Okay.
could ultimately hinder our progress.
So what does Nietzsche suggest we do with that hate once it has served its purpose?
Well, once it has helped us reclaim our power and assert our boundaries. Well, Nietzsche was a strong advocate for what he called amor fati,
Okay.
which translates to love of fate.
Right.
This concept involves embracing everything that has happened to you, both the good and the bad,
Yeah.
as integral parts of your unique journey.
So even the abuse,
Right.
the pain, the trauma, all of that becomes part of what makes you you.
Exactly. And while this doesn't mean condoning the actions of the abuser or
Okay.
minimizing the harm they caused,
Right.
it does suggest a radical acceptance of one's own life story, even the most difficult chapters.
That sounds incredibly challenging.
It is.
Especially when it comes to something as traumatic as abuse.
Yeah.
How do you move from a place of hate to a place of acceptance?
It's not
Yeah.
even love for
Yeah.
what you've experienced. It's not an easy process, and it's certainly not something that happens overnight.
Right.
For Nietzsche, it involved a profound shift in perspective,
Yep.
a willingness to see even the most negative experiences as opportunities for growth and self-discovery.
So instead of seeing yourself as a victim defined by the abuse, you start to see yourself as a survivor who has emerged from that experience stronger,
Yes.
more resilient,
Exactly.
more aware of your own strength.
And that doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing the pain.
Right.
It's about integrating those experiences into your understanding of yourself, of the world, and of your place in it.
It's about finding meaning,
Exactly.
even purpose in the suffering.
And for Nietzsche, this ability to find meaning in even the most difficult experiences was a hallmark of what he called the Übermensch, the overman, or the individual who has transcended conventional morality and created their own values.
So in a way, this process of moving from hate to acceptance,
Yes.
even love of fate, is part of that journey of becoming an Übermensch, of transcending the limitations imposed by societal norms and expectations.
I think that's a very insightful interpretation. It's about recognizing that even the most traumatic experiences can be catalysts for profound personal growth,
Right.
for a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive. We've explored Nietzsche's complex and often challenging perspective on hate, abuse, and the human condition.
Yes.
What are your final thoughts for our listeners as we conclude this exploration?
I think the key takeaway is that Nietzsche's philosophy,
Okay.
particularly when dealing with such intense emotions,
Yeah.
is best approached as a catalyst for self-reflection, not a set of rigid rules. His ideas are meant to challenge us,
Right.
to provoke us,
Yeah.
to make us think critically about our own assumptions and beliefs.
And within that process of self-reflection,
Right.
it's important to remember that there are no easy answers, no one-size-fits-all solutions when it comes to dealing with abuse and its aftermath.
Exactly. And if you are experiencing abuse, please know that you are not alone and that there are resources available to help you. Seeking support from trusted individuals or professionals can be crucial in navigating the complex emotions and challenges that arise from such experiences.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Nietzsche's profound and thought-provoking philosophy. We hope this exploration has inspired you to continue questioning, to continue learning, and to continue striving to become the most authentic version of yourself.